Greetings, everyone. To introduce myself, I'm Suzanne Garland from the University of Melbourne in Australia, and I've just taken over as president of IPVS from Professor Margaret Stanley. My background is in clinical microbiology, sexual health, and infectious diseases. And today, it's my pleasure to interview the 2021 recipient of the Morris Hilleman Award, Professor Xavier Bosch. And I do this on behalf of IPVS and Eurogen. So what is the Morris Hilleman Award? Well, this was set up by Merck, who sponsored the award, and very much in the honour and memory of Morris Hilleman, who was a microbiologist and a vaccinologist. And in fact, he worked at Merck until his passing in 2005. Now, in his period of working, he developed, unbelievably, 40 vaccines in his time at Merck, and 8 of 14 of these are routinely recommended in current vaccine schedules. So one could say one man's quest to defeat the world's deadliest diseases. So he is credited with saving more lives than any other medical scientist of the 20th century, and yet probably not very many people know about him. Now, the Morris Hilleman Award is given to a scientist in recognition of his or her outstanding contributions to the development and or implementation of HPV vaccines. Thus, today it's really most appropriate that we hear that this honour has been bestowed upon Professor Xavier Bosch. I've known Xavier for a long time, and I'll have to say he's amazingly energetic, very inquisitive, logical and wise. And something I've learned from him is always thinking of new angles to solve a problem. He truly is one of the greats of HPV. Now, he has been formally interviewed by Chris Amsinger on behalf of IPVS, and you can read this 2-pager later in more detail. It will be on the website. But I'd like to take the opportunity to ask Xavier some more, specifically some more questions, and do this in an informal way. Now, Xavier, my first question to you is, you started as a hemato-oncologist treating patients. Now, what inspired you to become an epidemiologist?
Well, good morning, Suzanne, and thank you very much for this introduction. I am also very honored to be the recipient of that award in 2021, which I accepted on behalf of my group, because I truly believe that in science, and particularly in our times, the ideas and the concepts and the designs and the studies, they are all the result of an interaction that never stops. And it happens in coffee breaks, in airplanes and airports, as well as in meetings and formal discussions. So you ask about my initial activities as a professional, and yes, indeed, I was an oncologist. But in the 60s and the 70s in Spain, oncology was very rudimentary. There were hardly any early diagnostic programs. There was no real screening. Even the concept of oncology was ill-developed at the time, and clearly the resources that we had to treat it, the chemotherapy that we had at the time, even the radiotherapy pieces of equipment or diagnostics, were very primitive. So overall, the feeling was not very satisfactory on the quality of the care that we offered our patients. So I visited one of the public health schools in California during one of my summer trips to the US universities, and I discovered a very attractive and interesting interaction between medicine and science and society and interventions in the population level. That, to me, had a strong attractive, and I did some formal training, and then I had the chance to get excellent mentors ahead of me, and I started a new career as an epidemiologist.
Incredible. again, as I said, very inquisitive. So I believe you started your life in research actually with another H virus, the hepatitis B virus. Can you expand on that and how it influenced you prior to getting into HPV?
Yes, my formal epidemiological career started at IARC, essentially. And at the time, I was doing some work on the exposure to aflatoxins in the diet and the risk of liver cancer. It was a common area of interest at the time, what we call the interactions between viral and chemical agents. That was not long after Palmer Beasley published his cohort study in Taiwan, showing a very strong association between hepatitis B infection, persistent hepatitis B infection, I would say, and liver cancer. Also, by that time, the first hepatitis B vaccines, which were actually developed by Maurice Hilleman, appeared in the market. And IARC decided to organize a very large cohort study, intervention cohort study in a rural country in Africa, in the Gambia, to prove that by vaccinating infants early in life with the hepatitis B vaccine, there was an opportunity to prevent liver cancer over time. That study was initiated and is now in its 35th year of follow-up. That was a gigantic cohort of 125,000 newborns that received either the EPI standard vaccination program or the standard program plus hepatitis B vaccine. And we are now collecting the cases and tracing them back as to their vaccination record. That might be indeed the first and largest proof of prevention of a major adult cancer by vaccinating in infancy. So I was involved in that study, and believe me that the preparation, the field work, the early analysis, the discussion on how to collect samples, how to ship samples, the early interactions between questionnaires and molecular markers, all of that was a gigantic preparation for the work that followed afterwards on HPV.
Fantastic. I remember the days of hepatitis B. I think I actually started with that prior to, or actually then herpes virus vaccines and eventually HPV. So yeah. I think we all have, in our journeys to the HPV path, there are various wow factors for each of us. I'd like to ask you what was the most important wow factor for you in your time with HPV?
Yeah, that's quite of an expression, the wow factor. And for me personally, probably was the first time that Kirti Shah phoned me and gave me a few results on the southern blots that he was doing on specimens in a case control study in Colombia and Spain. That phone call prompted a quick calculation of an odds ratio, which ended up being with a 3-digit mark, was over 100-fold the risk of the exposed women as compared. That was a crude odds ratio and no adjustment, no sophistication on that. But it was an eye-opening and say that cannot be the result of a confounding factor. That must be. Then the whole thing went on, and over time, the monographs at IARC and the special publications, reports, and everything else confirmed and declared HPV 16 and 18 as a class 1 human carcinogen. But certainly, by that time, the woke moment had already passed a long time ago.
Yes, and Kirti Shah was another one of those amazing microbiologists, wasn't he? So I'd just like to move on to the power of appropriate communication and education. And I know you really believe in the power of that. You developed the vaccine monographs. You were the leader of that globally, which was really clearly needed from a scientific and clinical point of view, epidemiological point of view. You've developed HPV Today, now known as HPV World, e-Oncologica in 7 languages. So we have a big challenge achieving WHO's elimination target, making cervix cancer a rare entity. And we clearly need high coverage of vaccines, screening, and appropriate treatment. So in today's world, with all that is occurring with pandemics, etc., how do you think we can best convince the lay population the importance of focusing on and really achieving the 90-70-90?
Well, Suzanne, in our little world, for scientists that are fully devoted to HPV, HPV is the center of attention of all conversations at all times, in any circumstances. So for us, speaking about HPV and interventions around HPV is the natural thing to happen. Now, it is amazing how hard it is to permeate that information to the medical community, to the public health care professionals worldwide, and eventually through them to the general population. That is a very slow process, particularly when at the end of the line, you are asking the population to do something, either participate in screening programs or vaccinate their children or having vaccines for themselves. That has proven to be the result of a consistent and untireless process of insisting, explaining, and adapting to the communication ways that the population is using nowadays. So it is not sufficient to give a master lecture in a given conference. You have to speak in every environment, with every technology, reaching the target populations that you want to address, and being consistent, being faithful, being very strong against fake news, and sustaining your effort for a long time. It takes a gigantic effort, and every stakeholder in the field needs to be involved in that. And this is something that scientists do not learn necessarily. And some of us, we do it very poorly, and some are very good. So we have to adapt to that situation and non-stop insisting and repeating that information.
Thank you. Now, for young people starting a career, and particularly in HPV, they really need a novel angle, I think, to focus upon and be successful. So what would you suggest to them?
Well, see, there are a number of replies to that question. I think that there is an avenue of information to be collected in the basic science field. And HPV is an extraordinary model to understand viral carcinogenesis and immune response to viral infections and protection, long-term protection. This is an avenue that certainly will continue and might generate answers that are useful in other fields in addition to the HPV field itself. Let's take, for example, the therapeutic aspects of HPV, which is an area that is underexploited at the time and might offer important alternatives for prevention in the future. But also, given the stage in which the field has reached, the public health area of intervention needs to be professionalized and addressed in a more scientific way. So studies on cost effectiveness, decision-making, calibration of the strategies to the local populations, adapting to the communities that one wishes to intervene upon. That area of public health research will certainly be the one that will dominate, in my view, the scenario in the years to come, particularly when countries are facing the challenge of the elimination campaign declared by WHO, because they will have to decide how and when and at which time to intervene in one of the three pillars that compose that strategy, which is vaccination, screening, and treatment.
I certainly agree with you. There's still a lot of work to be done. And sometimes I hear around me people saying, well, everything's been sorted out with HPV because you have the tools. There's no need to put more money in. But I agree, there's a lot more to do. We've got to really make the strategy of the 90-70-90 work. So I'd like to ask you something on a lighter note. You've had a huge commitment to your career and probably not much time for hobbies like a lot of us. But I do know you're a serious fisherman. I saw you once with a fishing line and tackle in your hand in Malaysia. So I wanted to know, whilst you're going to take some time off for fishing in the virological pond, but what about Mother Nature? Are you going to go back to your fishing?
Yeah, well, that is an interesting angle that you are taking here, Suzanne. And I must say that indeed, the leisure time and the family time and the friends time has been sacrificed over and over and over again along our careers. And that is something that you start feeling very strongly with age. When you look back and see, well, how much have I done to do a pleasure activity, something just for fun? And you are right, fishing was indeed one of my activities of desire, although I didn't practice too much. But nowadays, even that has changed. And issues like climate change, keeping the seas clean, overfishing, then endangered species in the seas, all of that is weighing on our way of thinking. And perhaps the fishing pleasure is giving a head to the pleasure of just being at sea and enjoying being there, not necessarily killing animals.
Yes, indeed. I should have finished off with a little visitor that came to our window the other day at our holiday house, a baby koala, which was so cute. It does a lot for one's psyche. Okay, so I have one last question, and I'd like to ask you, do you have a final message for the community?
Well, if I had to choose one, and that is a strong word, Suzanne, perhaps I would say that in this particular field, I had the chance to meet a few geniuses, a few, not very many. And these are most welcome, and these are people that have the capacity to dominate a full discussion with relatively little preparation. But as I said at the introduction of this interview, for the average professional, one should recognize that the team efforts are the ones that prevail, and that anything that occurs to you and at a given point in time, it seems like it is your idea, indeed is a sum and the mix of a number of little bits and pieces collected with your interactions with your colleagues, with your experiences, with your studies, with your readings, with your thinking, but also as part of a general movement of acknowledging and acquiring information and understanding the environment and understanding the topic that you are discussing. So again, recognizing the effort of the teams that are behind us, that puts a few of us in a spotlight and at a certain point in time, like receiving the Hilleman Award or interviewing Suzanne Garland in a very early morning chat, that kind of thing, it represents and in fact needs to pay recognition to the teams that are behind us.
Absolutely. I couldn't endorse that more. And I'd really like to finish off by saying congratulations to you and your team, Xavier. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, and have a nice presidency of the IPV Society.
Well, it's actually been a lovely community in general. I think a lot of collegiality, and maybe that's what, starting in a small group that has grown, almost like the power of amplification of PCR. But it's lovely to see new work, and I guess in a lifetime one doesn't always see causality for a disease, an intervention, and then see the public health rewards. So I think we've been very lucky to choose HPV, haven't we?
I think we have, and indeed, in addition to intelligence and hard work, choosing the topic of interest is one of the crucial issues on the fate of your career. Yeah. And we had the best that could be done at the time.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and congratulations again to you and your team.
Thank you to you.